The address is the Goodwill. It's on Beachmont. The address is 4051. I have a man here. He's been injured. He's been hit by an automobile.
Any given moment on any given day, somebody calls 911. Some kind of incident, accident has occurred.
Every second made a difference in this baby's life. Seriously, every second made a difference.
You know, our thoughts were that he could very well have died from his injuries.
Without the paramedics here and without the air flight here, he would have had no chance at all. They gave him the opportunity to survive.
Actually, we just celebrated, 2009 was our year to celebrate our 25th anniversary for Air Care and Mobile Care. And we do have a long, very interesting history, actually. Air Care was originally started with the founder of Air Care, who was Dudley Smith, was the original director of Air Care. And it was his thesis project for his master's at school. And he was at the University of Cincinnati and working with, they actually started an ambulance service over at the University of Cincinnati 30 years ago, and from that it became his thesis project, and it took a couple years to develop. And with that, they started with an aircraft based here at University Hospital 25 years ago, and been doing transports and growing and evolving ever since. The mobile ICU, there was a need for that critical care transport to start, and that was originally initiated at Christ Hospital through a group of cardiologists that needed to transport their patients from some of the rural areas into the cath lab. So they started a mobile ICU team, and shortly after that, then they started a basic life support team to support transporting the patients out of Christ Hospital. So there's two different things working kind of at the same time, and that with the evolvement of the Health Alliance, it made sense that, you know, we bring all these resources together and make it one comprehensive service to provide a wide spectrum, so it becomes a one call, can do it all for whatever need the patient needs. So that's where the BLS, the ALS, and the mobile ICU and the rotor wing came together to work as a unified group.
The main difference between the two, in particular for our program, is the time factor. That truly is the big deciding factor. The physician component is important, so sometimes some interfacilities would prefer to have a physician on board and therefore would call us. But the way we train our staff, the ground nurses and the air nurses, both teams are trained exactly the same, so they can deal with the same patient populations. But the time factor would be the determining factor between sending one over the other.
I think there's a deep analysis of what type of patients need to be transported. What is the need? What does the community need? So if the patient needs happen to be a critical care, then you have to look at the scope of practice of the various practitioners. So what level of care can a nurse provide? What level of care can a physician be able to provide for those patients, or a paramedic or EMT, and identify the need and then match that need with the most appropriate level of healthcare provider.
The main difference is the educational level of the physician, the ability to diagnose more in depth, and therefore allowing some different interventions, allowing to know what the hospital is going to be doing when we get there, so we're able to start procedures or interventions that'll easily be carried over to the hospital setting. So, a lot of the things that you do in transport, a lot of it is pretty defined by some guidelines and criteria nationally, but having the physician on board gives us that extra edge as far as knowledge and capabilities and just further diagnosis that helps the patient in the end of their process and their visit to the hospital.
I think that, and I'll speak mostly on the air side, since that's where I spend most of my time. I think that people kind of mistakenly think of helicopter EMS as solely something that has to do with trauma. And, because that's where we're most visible when we land on I-275 to take care of a patient injured in a serious car accident. And that's kind of when you see us on the news and so forth. But trauma is actually a little less than half of what we do. So you need to kind of, I guess, broaden your perspective of what air care does. We fly an awful lot of patients with heart attacks, with strokes, a lot of pediatric patients. About 11 or 12% of what we do is pediatrics, and not just kids injured in trauma, but also sick kids with status asthmaticus or status epilepticus or sepsis. A lot of patients with high-risk OB, obstetric transport. So there's a great variety in, as you mentioned, not just in emergency medicine, but in helicopter EMS as well. And so that's why it certainly does take a lot of training to be ready to do this job well, both from a nursing standpoint and a physician standpoint.
And the uniqueness about air care is the fact that we fly with a physician nurse in the back, and we're only one of less than 5% of the programs across the nation that are still able to that have that level of support from their facility to continue that. And what that allows us to do is really open the doors up from University Hospital and take that hospital out to the patient.
Usually on the mobile ICUs in the aircraft are where we use our critical care nurses. We have a total of about 23 nurses on staff with us right now. There's probably an average of about 20 years of experience between all of the nurses that we have. For criteria for this position requires at least 5 years of nursing experience. So, and that's in either an ED or a critical care setting. We feel it's very important that nurses have at least 5 years of experience to be able to deal with the issues that arise in an outside of a hospital experience. So that's very important. We prefer to have people with pre-hospital experience, so if you are a nurse and also an EMT or paramedic, that's very highly sought after. If you have both adult and pediatric experience, we look for that as well. But we do require, of course, basic life support, advanced cardiac life support, pediatric advanced life support, neonatal resuscitation, and advanced trauma courses like a TNCC or an ATLS type of a course. And we also require our nurses to have a national certification within 1 year of hire here. So our requirements are pretty steep, but our patient population are very sick. And we can see that just in general, health of patients are sicker. So we need to be able to have people who are able to deal with those in a different situation outside of the hospital.
And it's a deep, dark secret we don't tell people, but the nurses know way more than we do.
Yes, I have been with University Air Care since the beginning, so it's been 25 years this past November. And I'm the only existing flight nurse from the beginning of the program. We had 5 full-time flight nurses initially and a couple part-time. So over the course of the 25 years, we've had nurses that stayed a long time. We actually have some that are probably 22, 23 years at this program. So we have a pretty good track record for keeping nurses.
I always knew that it was one of the best flight programs in the country, one of the very few flight programs that flies with a physician and a nurse, which is the highest level of medical providers that you can get on a helicopter.
In order to get a job as an air care flight nurse, you meet much more rigorous standards than the government would say you have to be a flight nurse. So you have to have a minimum of 5 years of nursing experience in critical care nursing, be that in the emergency department, in the ICU, or at another program in flight nursing.
Yeah, I went into nursing to get this job. Not just to be a flight nurse, but to be a flight nurse at University Air Care.
On average, if you look at all of our flight nurses, they have 18 years of critical care flight nursing experience. So we are very fortunate to fly with the best of the best in the flight nurses. Every flight we have an emergency physician, a flight nurse, and a pilot. If you look at helicopter EMS in the United States, that is quite unusual. Again, there's about 400 flight programs, give or take, in the United States right now. And of those, there are 35 that ever fly with a flight physician on any of their flight missions, and there are 7, at my last count, that, like us, fly with a flight physician on every flight. So we're quite unique in the United States. We feel strongly that on the physician side, an emergency medicine physician is ideally suited to do this job well, because emergency physicians are trained to deal with the emergent care of any kind of patients.
Much of what we do here, probably the most important thing we do here is not necessarily getting the patient in the helicopter and going. It is getting the doctor and the nurse to the patient initially. You are really you're in effect bringing an emergency room to that patient, and that is what we really do. Once the doctor and nurse get there, things tend to get stabilized, they get calmed down, they get the basic necessities they need, and then we get on our way. And that has made that tends to make a much greater difference getting them to the patient as opposed to the patient to the hospital.
One of the biggest advantages to being at a hospital-based flight program like we are is that our crew, when they're not out on a flight, has the chance to take advantage of all of the educational resources of the hospital. In either the flight physician or the flight nurse case, it's a several-month process to really finish your orientation and be ready to fly as a full-fledged member of the team. A large part of that is in doing what we call buddy flights or ride-along flights, where you are not the crew member primarily responsible for caring for the patient, but you are observing more experienced crew who have been doing the job for a while, taking care of the patient, while you are watching and learning from them, you are getting to the point where things like aviation things like how to work the seat belts, how to fasten your helmet becomes second nature, so that you don't have to think about those things at all once it becomes time for you to be a full-fledged flight crew member. We have flown with a flight doc, an emergency physician, since our very first day back in November of 1984, and there's basically 2 reasons that we do it. Most importantly, by far, is that it is, we believe extremely strongly, what is best for the patients. The second reason being that it is an incredible educational experience for the flight physician.
University of Cincinnati Emergency Medicine Residency Program is the oldest emergency medicine residency training program in the country. We began back in, I believe it's 1978, for the very first training program. And so we attract a lot of the most competitive, the best resident candidates out of medical school who want to come here and do their residency here. And so it's a match program where we're trying to attract them and recruit them, and on the same time they are looking at the best programs to go to do their training. Fortunately, we fall into one of the best programs, training programs in the country, and we attract some of the highest caliber students to do that.
I was drawn to UC because it's one of the best residency programs in the country. They recruit medical school applicants from all over the country. We have people from the East Coast to the West Coast, Texas, Canada, and that kind of quality of program really attracted me.
So the University of Cincinnati Emergency Medicine program, the residency program, we have 48 residents in our residency training program. Every single one of them is required to fly during their career. It's a part of the training program. We're one of very few programs that actually has a physician on every flight at University Air Care, and every one of our residents does fly. And so they have to know that when they come into the interview process of interviewing for a job here to go through the match. It's an incredible recruiting tool, and then it's an incredible patient care tool when we actually have a physician on every flight, and we fly our 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year residents throughout the duration of their career here at UC through the residency program. But every single resident flies and usually logs somewhere around 100 flights in their career by the time they finish. Obviously that's an average, some less, some more.
A lot of other programs will have flight physician experience available, but not mandatory, but it's definitely an integral part of the residency program here. So in looking for a residency, I was looking for one of the best in the country, where I could be trained to be the best emergency physician I could be. The quality of the people here are phenomenal, and they were the people that I wanted to surround myself with as my peers. So that's how I ended up here.
Our residency is a 4-year program. You have your intern year, which our interns don't fly. That we believe that there has to be a core amount of becoming a physician and getting the training and the necessary skills to be out on air care with a nurse. And so our residents get through their first year and then start flying July 1st of their second year. And then our training program is a little bit different than most training programs. The majority of emergency medicine training programs are 3 years. Ours is 4 years, and there are about 10% of the programs in the country are a 4-year program, and we happen to be one of those programs.
It's an eye-opener as far as understanding what pre-hospital medicine is all about. I mean, I accept patients in 2 factors, in that I am an emergency attending down in the emergency department here at UC, and then I also work up in the NSICU as a neurocritical care fellow. And air care brings patients to both places. So I get inter-hospital transfers into the unit upstairs, and then a lot of trauma and inter-hospital transfers or scene transfers into the emergency department downstairs. And I think that having gone through that training experience just makes me appreciate what the conditions are like out in the field, particularly at motor vehicle collisions when they're picking up trauma patients. I mean, it is, in a patient that's acutely injured, it is very hard to get an IV in those patients. It's very hard to put a breathing tube into those patients if they need one. I mean, they work in very suboptimal conditions out there, and paramedics and EMTs do the best that they can out in that environment, and sometimes they just don't have the tools that they need to take care of the patients, and that's where air care comes in to really complement what those paramedics and EMTs do out there. And I think I have a better understanding just of what they deal with from being out there myself and working with them out in the field.
We have 2 different types on the air side of calls. We have what we call a scene call, and we have an inter-hospital call. An inter-hospital call is between 2 facilities, and we get a call from one facility wanting to fly a patient to another facility. So whatever level of care is not offered at one facility may be offered at the other. So it's always a higher level of care from one to the other. So what they'll do is they'll contact us and ask us if we can fly. If we can fly, then we go ahead and take the information and dispatch the aircraft. The big question is if we can fly. We go on a traffic light system for weather, red being no, yellow being caution, and green being go. With go, we don't have to ask the pilot, hey, is the weather okay to fly? We know it is. If it's yellow, that means caution. Something's not right in the area. Our minimums may not be met. It may be raining, snowing, sleeting, icing, whatever. We're going to double check that. So before we even accept the flight, we'll call the pilot and tell him the destination point A to point B. We do not give a description of the patient or anything. We don't want that to cloud the judgment of the team. On the radio, I'll say Air Care 1 or Air Care 2 pilot weather check. Okay, so once we get that okay, then we can fly. If it's red, we already know we're not going anyplace. So we can turn that flight down right away. And we tell the people why we can't fly. And if it's safe to send our ground unit, then we can say we can offer this by ground. For scene flights, that would be going out to an auto accident, a shooting, a stabbing, out in the field, out in the community. The 911 center is called by the fire department and said, we need an aircraft, or check for an aircraft's availability. The 911 center in turn calls us. Once they call us, we still go through the same weather check to make sure we're okay to fly. If we're okay to fly, we automatically dispatch that team out to the scene. Once we get dispatched, in the ComSpec, it is our responsibility to make sure that we get a cross street, an address, someplace where we can look onto the map and get the GPS coordinates. With those GPS coordinates, we relay those to the pilot, and that way they can fly between point A and point B in the shortest direct line as possible. We also make sure we have a radio frequency to contact the ground before we land so we can get a patient update and that LZ safety briefing so we know what's going on. All that's going off all this time, and we only have 6 to 8 minutes to have all this happen. We're getting the information, we're alerting the facility, be it Children's, be it University, if it's a trauma center. We're letting them know, hey, we're sending the team out, this is how long it's going to be. That way the emergency department knows, the trauma people know, everybody is on the same page at all times. And as the aircraft is on the way out, it is our responsibility to make sure we're tracking that aircraft at all times. We have to know, God forbid, if something happens, that we can find that aircraft at any given time. We have a computerized tracking system that automatically tracks the aircraft. Now, we can't always rely on that 100% because, as we know, technology does fail. So we also have our ComSpecs trained in finding that aircraft by hand. So we're on top of those maps, knowing where they're at any given point. That's our primary responsibility. Once that aircraft is airborne, that is our main focus. We make sure everything is done safe at all times and for the safety of not only our crew, but the people on the ground and the patient. Because it does nothing to get there or to get back if you can't do it safely. After they lift from the scene and they're en route back to the hospitals, we put the team in contact with the physicians so they can give a report. Everybody's on the same page. So when they land, they have everybody ready to play. There are times you're making 20 to 30 phone calls per minute or per flight, to make sure everybody's on the same page. Something's changing. The 911 center calls and says, hey, we're changing the landing zone. That can happen 2 or 3 times. We can get out there and say, we're not comfortable landing where we are at. Now we're getting back on the horn. Hey, we're changing landing zones. The aircraft's calling us. We're making sure where everybody is on the same page. So safety is of the utmost importance. Not only that, but we're not the only helicopter program in town. And with that, throws another safety feature out there. Are we the only aircraft responding to this accident if it's a scene flight? And if we're not, we have to know who is responding with us and that we're talking to each other not only on the phone but in the air. It's like anything. If communication doesn't start and happens effectively, lines get crossed. And you want to make sure that if those lines do get crossed, everybody's on the same page.
So when we arrive at an accident scene, usually we know the people, the EMS providers that are there. I may not remember everyone's name, but usually I recognize a face, or maybe it's someone that I used to work with at Union Township, which I love showing up someplace where I know the people's names and I know the great quality of care that they got. Sometimes I can say, all right, we're going to Union Township. They're a high-performing paramedic level ambulance. I know that they're going to have the maximum done on this patient. So when we really, as we're coming in, we start to build a rapport with the ground units via the radio. So we communicate with them on the radio when we're a few miles away from landing. And the big part of the information that we want to get is some safety information about the landing zone, where it is, are there any obstructions. But then we also want to try to get a patient report. What happened to the patient? Because sometimes when we're called out, we don't even know what happened. We're told, you're going out to Union Township, Claremont County for a person injured. Okay, well, how were they injured? Is it a gunshot wound? Is it a car crash? Was someone falling off a horse? So we try to get that information from the radio, and that's when we really start to build that initial rapport for that scene, is to say, okay, this is what you're coming for, this is what we've done, all right? And that just kind of starts the transfer of care. When we land, typically as we're starting to walk towards the patient with our gear, whether it just be our bags or if we take our stretcher with us also, one of the EMS or fire department folks will come up to us and start giving us a report, which is great. They'll just say, hey, this is a guy, he was not wearing a seatbelt, he was driving his car, and they're helping to breathe for him right now in the back of the ambulance, which gets us thinking, all right, it gets my mind thinking, all right, what do we need to do once we get in the back of the ambulance? What do we need to assess? What kind of treatment do we need to have? And it also lets me potentially get on the radio to my pilot and say, you know what, we want to leave the helicopter running so that we can get out of here a little bit quicker. But then once we get into the ambulance, we have a routine where the flight nurse, like myself, always goes in the back door of the ambulance, and the flight physician always goes into the side door of the ambulance where they're closer to the patient's head. Once we both get in there, then we get a more thorough report from the medical crew in the ambulance. Some of the places we go just have basic EMTs or first responders, which is kind of the lowest tiered of EMS. In some places that we go, we have paramedic level. And so the report that we get will often vary as far as the information that they have based on their education level. But the expectation, whether we're working with paramedics at an accident scene or at another hospital, is that once Air Care shows up, they take control of the patient. Now, taking control doesn't mean that everyone else leaves, because we often still need a lot of help. And we love our EMS folks because they are so good at working with us and getting this patient what we call packaged and ready for transport. Sometimes that involves a lot. Sometimes we have to start IVs, give medications, put breathing tubes in, decompress pneumothoraxes and things of that nature, and we require a lot of help because for us, on Air Care, we're just 2 people, which works out great when we're in the back of the helicopter. It's very small. There's not room for more people. So we try to get the patient a little more stabilized in the ambulance, and so we really need the help. And I tell you, I have never had a bad interaction with an EMS person on the scene, because I think they're used to working in high acuity situations. We're used to it. We come to the table together, and our goal is to get the job done. And there's not if things are relaxed and the patient's pretty stable, we may share some nice words about working together in the past or something like that. But our goal is to get this patient out of there and stabilized as quickly as we can. And I tell you, we have great teamwork around here. It's really wonderful.
We obviously have initiated care. We have obviously made a decision that we believe that Air Care is a benefit, not only expedient transport to a hospital for whatever reason, but also that they're going to bring something to this patient's care that is in the best interest of the patient. At the same time, we've obviously spent some time with the patient. We've initiated care. We may have started some IVs, done some airway techniques, did some interventions before they get there. We also have the advantage that we probably know more about the mechanism of injury. They're not going to know that when they get to the scene, so they're relying on us to say, this person was, whether it be a gunshot wound or shot or whatever at close range, and this is the caliber of the gun, or they were in an auto accident and they were the driver and they were unrestrained and they hit a tree and they have damage on the driver's side. Especially if we're not landing them at the scene, they can't see that, and that's all important information. So then there's this transfer of information and transfer of care. And there's a short time period in the back of that ambulance where it's all hands on deck, that we have the paramedics are all in there, putting monitors on, starting IVs, giving medications, doing airway techniques. You got the doctor, you got the flight nurse who are highly skilled and highly trained in what they do. That's what they do. They bring a level of expertise and training and equipment that you can't get anyplace else in the pre-hospital setting. Everybody's busy, and then that transfer of care goes from primarily being us when we start to turning it over to them, and then we assist them in packaging that patient, transferring them over to their cardiac monitor, their IV pumps, whatever it is they're doing, and then ultimately loading them in the helicopter where they take over total care and transport them to the receiving hospital. But the teamwork is just phenomenal. I mean, these are highly trained on both sides, skilled, dedicated medical staff that are ultimately looking at what is in the best care of this patient on this day at this time. How can we provide the best service possible to this? And everybody's focused on that. Follow up, they take it down. We usually receive a phone call after them. We'll have a follow-up letter from them. It doesn't end there because obviously we're interested, and the paramedics are interested. What happened? What was the outcome? What can we learn from this? What can we do better the next time? What can be done differently? And they're very involved in the education of the pre-hospital people. They put on conferences, do continuing ed. They have online continuing ed. So it's just a total team approach that everybody's in it to provide on any given day at that specific time. How can we best provide that care to this patient for the best possible outcome?
911, what's the address of the emergency?
The address is the Goodwill. It's on Beachmont.
Well, we received the first call to our communication center at 1347.
He's been injured. He's been hit by an automobile.
We actually arrived on the scene at 1350 hours, so shortly after we received the call, within about 3 minutes. Well, we already had some notification en route that this had the potential to be a serious run for us, so when they arrived on the scene, they found a pickup truck up against the wall, and they found one victim there that had very serious injuries to his lower extremities. Well, one of the first things they want to do is do a quick evaluation. They did that and then start to stabilize. And in this case, there was serious bleeding. So one of the first things they need to do is start to be concerned about the bleeding, and they work to control that. And the officer there immediately seen the situation and called for air care. And that was very early on in the call when they were on the scene. And he called for them about 4 minutes after he arrived on the scene.
Esteban is a very humble man, and what I mean by a humble man, he's a man that he washed dishes for a living, and even though he had very little income, he really loved other people, and especially small children. He loved to play with them, and he had gone up to Goodwill one of the things he wanted to do was see if he could afford a secondhand bicycle, because there was a lady downstairs, single mother, had 3 children that she was trying to raise by herself. And he had gone up there to see if he could afford a bicycle for one of the kids. And so when he was outside, the driver of the truck got confused, and when she pulled into the parking spot, she thought her foot was on the brake, but it was on the gas.
He says that if he would have known that the truck wasn't going to stop, he would have moved aside, but he just never knew. So the truck came and hit him against and pinned him against the wall.
And so the closer she got, the more gas she gave it, and it jumped the curb and over a sign and hit him and pinned him against the cinder block wall, and still thinking her foot was on the brake instead of the accelerator, she kept pressing, and so what happened is she crushed and pinched his legs off.
He kept telling her to back up, and she wouldn't. I think she kept going more and more, pushing the gas, and that's how the truck destroyed basically his legs. The truck backed up a little bit, and then I was able to see the blood, and at that time I think she moved a little bit more back, and then she got out, and I was able to see that she was a woman, and I just fell to the ground. I couldn't stand anymore, and then I don't remember anything else after that.
Immediately some people inside Goodwill had called the police. The police were on their way. Paramedics were there.
The paramedics all have a standard protocol that they follow for all EMS runs, and part of that protocol gets into specifically trauma, and there are specific protocols that talk about when it's appropriate to use air medical transport versus ground transport. So in addition to the standard protocols through the Academy of Medicine of Cincinnati, which is the protocol that we follow, then we have our own policies on when it's appropriate to use, because obviously distance from the hospital, location, whether the person's trapped or not, there's other things that go into whether you're going to transport by ground or by air. Obviously, we're always trying to provide the best possible care that we can to our patients. Not only are we looking at how we can do that in the pre-hospital setting, but ultimately long-term definitive care, what is in the best interest of the patient. And all those things go into the decision as to how these people are going to be treated at the scene, and ultimately how they're going to be transported and to which hospital they're going to end up going to.
When we landed, they put us in the back of the squad, and the first thing that we saw was the injuries to his lower extremities. And the squad was telling us that he could not speak English, so there was no way for us to communicate with him whatsoever, because none of us spoke Spanish or anything. So when we were in the back, the only thing that I could do was just to pat him and try to talk to him. And even though I would tell him what I was doing, I knew that he didn't understand me, but he would shake his head yes. And so what we had to do, because of the extent of his injuries to his lower extremities, we had to make sure that those were wrapped and not bleeding too much. And because of the extent of them, we knew that he had lost a lot of blood. He had 2 IVs that the squad had started, which helped out a lot. When we got him into the helicopter, the first thing we did was, after I took a blood pressure, his blood pressure was like in the 70s, and after I took his blood pressure, we hung a unit of blood. And by the time I got him back to UC, he stayed awake the whole time. By the time I got him back, I had actually given him 2 units of blood by the time we got back to UC. So when we got to the emergency room, his blood pressure was up to like 110. So one of the things that they want us to do is to give them blood right away if we found that they've lost blood, because that actually helps them out in the long run. And that's what we did. When we got him there, the trauma team was waiting for us when we got there, and they brought in an interpreter to talk to him, so they got all of his information. And when they turned around and looked at me, they told me that they didn't know if they would be able to save his legs. And I saw that when I had first looked at him. I knew that that was a possibility. And you always know that that's really devastating for the people when they any of these injuries that they have. So I actually went back and followed up with him in the surgical ICU, but all the times that I went up there, he was always like out of it, and he never did see me go up there, but I always follow up with all of my patients that I fly in. I follow up with them and with their family.
When I was at the hospital, I was able to meet a blondie.
I was working one day, and some guy from the hospital called me and said he was the Spanish interpreter, and I'm going, okay. I'm thinking, I don't know Spanish. I don't know why you're calling me, And he said, he says, did you fly in Esteban? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, he's in the clinic, and he would like to see you. So I went to the clinic when he had come into the clinic, and I went to see him over there.
We were at the hospital for a follow-up exam when we met Deborah, and she saw him, and she's not a very big gal, and she just wrapped his arms around her, and he wrapped his arms around her. They just both wept. I was weeping too.
Oh, that was amazing, because when I went in, I looked around and I saw him sitting over there, but then the guy that he was living with at the time, he came up to me and he just grabbed me in a big hug, and and so then he was crying, and then he made me cry, and then Esteban came over, and he couldn't speak any English, but he looked at me and he said, thank you. He did say thank you. And his eyes were all teary. It's like, oh God, it's like, so he and I sit down, and I just bent down in front of him and, and just told him, and the guy was, interpreting for me. I told him, I said, I'm just so glad that you did fine with this. I'm so glad you're doing well, because I was really worried that he wasn't going to do okay.
Mike Tango, good day.
That's clear, sir. 1411, have a safe flight.
See the Earth. And so we have weather limitations such as ceilings, 800-foot ceilings. For example, 802 are our local weather limitations. That means we need the ceiling to be 800 feet, and we need 2 miles visibility. Okay, so if we have that, we're legal to go. Okay, under our air care program. Well, to be honest, we really do not know, are not supposed to know anything about the patient, and that's for safety reasons. We get a mission, whether it's inter-hospital, transfer from hospital to hospital, or a scene, which, like you're saying, somebody had a car wreck on a road to here. They ask if we have the weather, legal weather. We determine that, and then we go get the patient. How big's the patient? And that's really my main concern. If I'm going there and I know that I'm at the limit on my gross weight, then I'll ask a dispatch, can we get a patient weight? And then we may just have to burn a little more fuel once we get to the hospital to make it, to make sure we're under our gross weight limitations.
They do the magic in the back. I mean, they do all that work to be able to take care of those patients, to see some of those accident scenes that we fly into, and those patients are in dire need of critical care. And the doc and the nurse do a wonderful job of taking care of the patient. And I just kind of look at it as my role is to get them safely from point A to point B. And we all work together as a crew when we get into an accident scene or we go to a hospital. When we have the patient on board, my focus is being able to take the patient from the scene or the hospital back, to the more advanced care. We always, when we take off from here, have safety at the forefront of our minds when we do our job, because we're not going to help anyone by crashing the helicopter if we're going out there to save someone's life that's been in a crash themselves.
What we do, we have safeties. We go to the different fire departments, and we'll have a safety with the fire department. And what it is, we'll go there and we'll explain what we expect from them and ask them what they expect from us.
And it's an important part of our air care program is the education for all the fire departments, where they will go out there on an annual basis and give the training to the fire departments as far as the landing zone requirements, what we're looking for. Because when we take off out of here, we'll have the coordinates going to the accident scene that they've given to our comm center. We plug that into our GPS. That's going to get us out to the accident scene. And before we land, we will talk to the ground person in charge of the accident scene, and they will give us a landing zone description. And they'll tell us about all the obstacles, what we're going to be landing on, the type of surface, and things like that. And then as crew members, as a pilot and the medical crew members, we are going to be verifying that information, and then looking on the ground, making sure that it is clear and it's something safely that we can land into. We always have the right to call it off at any time as far as if we feel like we should not land in that LZ. And so we'll go and we'll land in there, and after we've gotten that information from the landing zone commander, and then we get on the ground, and our medical crew does takes care of the patient, and then we get them back in there. And that LZ commander does a very good job of, and as part of our training, is making sure that that landing zone is safe and secure from bystanders. A lot of times we may be going landing on highways. We need to ensure that traffic is not going to become a factor, because we may sit there running in the helicopter as the pilot, and then the nurse and the doc are getting out while the helicopter is still running. They're going to take care of the patient, and the pilot's just sitting in there with a running helicopter. We need to make sure that that landing zone stays secure, and that's where the fire departments do a great job of keeping everyone away from the running helicopter, and so that way we can complete our task and do it in a safe manner and get that patient into the needed care that is required for them.
We would like to have 100 by 100 feet clearance, okay, when we go to an LZ.
We'll land in people's backyards, on roads, and things like that, and so part of that educational training that we do is, they're looking for those items, and even at night when they're going to look at the landing zone, they're not only looking on the ground for objects that might be flying up, but then they're also looking at hazards up in the air, where we tell them to take their flashlight, shine it up, because there may be wires going from the house out to the road that may not be easily seen, and that's something that as crew members they look at the LZ from the ground, but then we also have a different perspective from the air, and we verify that information, and they may not have seen that wire, but it's still on us as we're coming in the LZ to ensure that that's a safe landing zone for us to get into.
We go over things such as when I'm en route to an LZ, I will call the LZ commander on the radio, and I'll tell him I'm 5 minutes out, and I need an LZ description and patient information, whether it's a road, a field, whatever. Maybe be landing at a hospital. Maybe they just went to the hospital. And then I want hazards, and hazards will include wires, towers, just anything that could be sticking up out. Actually, a lot of times you'll have sticks and stuff sticking up in fields. What they usually do there is they'll put like a vehicle or put somebody out there. Night's very critical, because on a low illumination night, you can't really see anything hardly out there. So we have to do everything real nice and slow. And now we have night vision goggles at Air Care, which is really helping a lot. But we're still going to do everything the same. We're going to go into the LZ, do a nice high recon. Then we're going to come in nice and slow, even on the landing, like we always do. If somebody sees something that we didn't see on the ground, they can always go, hey, okay, our rate of descent is so slow, we can add power and just go around. And that's happened a few times, and it's going to happen. And the reason we haven't had a bad accident is because we do everything nice and slow, and we train our pilots to make sure you have plenty of power and be looking. So
I think it's driven in from the very beginning of when you become helicopter pilots. The ability to land anywhere with a helicopter is it becomes second nature. Of okay, if I'm going to land in a field or someplace, I'm going to verify, make sure that there is the landing zone is secure. There's not any obstacles and things like that that are going to be a problem when we go in there to land. So I think it becomes second nature as far as checklists. Now there is training that we do because with our residents, the doctors that we fly with, they're new to flying in the aircraft, and we teach them to be valuable crew members. Our nurses have vast experience. A lot of them, I think they have an average of 18 years of experience, and so they have that knowledge now in order to ensure that our doctors, the less experienced ones, as they start to fly with us, we want to give them that training because we want them to be an important part of that crew, and so that way they're looking out for obstacles. They know what we're looking for, and because they can't assume that we see everything from our front right seat. They have a different perspective from the left rear, or even the nurse sitting in the left front seat. She may see something that we didn't see, and so that's why it's important that we have a good working environment, teamwork to get into that landing zone. So
we, without exaggerating, it is a high-risk, high-pressure environment when we go out. We now take the R1s, those are the residents, their first year. We now start letting them just ride along and see how things go. And that is one area we've tried to improve our safety and our teamwork again, is just to start them even younger now, start them sooner. And when they get to be that R2, and now they're the doctor that's on the scene by themselves, they at least have gone through an R1 period the previous year of what is that like? What they now literally can see themselves and imagine themselves what it's going to be like the next year. And I think that's a big improvement in safety. It is a huge improvement just in the way we look at the crew picture, because now they really get that feel of you are a crew member, you have aviation responsibilities, along with other responsibilities, medical responsibilities, but you have aviation responsibilities too.
It's funny how we're all excited about doing scenes because it's new. Every time you go somewhere, they'll put you somewhere. It's a challenge, but of course we're going to do everything safe. But it's a challenge for us, and so they'll get us as close as they can to the scene. But a lot of times, if it's too, what we would call maybe too slopey, we have slope limitations in helicopters. They may have to go another quarter mile or a mile away into a flat field, which is fine. But we try to get as close as we can to the scene if it's a safe enough area. But it's a challenge every scene, and so it's something that we look forward to. And the more we do it, of course, the better. And of course, we always do it safe as we can do it. Working with the people that I work with, the professionals, whether it be mechanics, the nurses, and the doctors, that's a great part of it. They're great people to work for, and every day's a challenge and fun, and we see a lot of crazy stuff in our job. And again, it's very rewarding knowing that sometimes probably every flight that we take is not a life-saving flight, but if we can save a life, it's very rewarding. Like I said, I flew attack helicopters in the Gulf, so my job was to blow up tanks and whatever. And so it's much more fulfilling to know that you're saving a life than have to be taking one. So I love it. That's the main thing I love about the job.
Well, I'm responsible for the maintenance on these aircraft to make sure they're in airworthiness condition. That includes the inspections, the tooling, the parts, and keeping up on all the maintenance that's due. These helicopters that we have here are on what they call a AAIP inspection program. It's a progressive inspection program. So we have inspections that are due on a daily basis, that we have to look at something. Every day we do a daily on the aircraft. We look it over from top to bottom. And then if we have any other maintenance inspections that are due, we do those. Preventive maintenance is the key here. We want to try to keep things from breaking as much as we can. That's why we do all the progressive inspections, to do that, because the worst thing we can do is to be out of service. The CAMES is what we're part of, and their accreditation is very high. Well, they look at our records. They look at our training records from our training as aircraft technicians through the company. They look at our tooling to make sure it's been calibrated. They look at the aircraft for the cleanness and the shape that it's in. Yeah, the FAA has one set of standards, and CAMES goes a step above that. They have different issues that go above and beyond what the FAA does, and we have to abide by those too. And like I said, they came through and they look at us from top to bottom. They look at our facilities. They look at our tooling. They look at our inspection program. The mechanics are on call 24 hours a day, and we don't let anything go maintenance-wise. Well, what we do, I think, is very important to the flight, because if we're not doing our job, the aircraft doesn't fly. When the aircraft doesn't fly, they're not out saving lives. So it's our job to keep the aircraft in very, very good shape, to keep our downtime to a very, very low minimum, as much as possible. But these are mechanical things, and they break. And when they do, we have to fix them. Sometimes we're here 20 hours a day to fix them. Sometimes we're not. Sometimes we can get it fixed pretty quick. But the availability of the aircraft is the key, because they can't fly if the aircraft isn't flyable, isn't airworthy.
You know, I wasn't at the field. I was about a mile away coaching another one of my son's games, and my phone rang as I was coming off the field, and I looked down at it and saw that it was Cole's coach. And I thought, boy, that's odd. He's calling me in the middle of a baseball game. So I decided to answer the phone, and he said, Scott, I don't mean to alarm you, but Cole's been hit in the head with the line drive while he was pitching, and he said he's conscious and awake, but we've called 911 as a precaution, and we're going to take him to the local community hospital, Bethesda, as a precaution.
Well, from the accident, I remember laying on the ground and looking up at my coach, Rob Walker. And I also remember I remember laying there on the ground and looking over towards where the road was, and I saw the ambulance, and I was thinking, why can't I just get back up and play?